Oh my gosh, that was beautiful last night. That was a recording of the Slichos prayers that we had here in our neighborhood in Hancock Park in Los Angeles at Mayan Yisrael, led by our rabbi, Rav Yekusiel Kalmanson. Slichos are the penitential prayers that we say during the week. Sephardic Jews say it the whole month before Rosh Hashanah. Ashkenaz Jews say it for the week before. And the first day of saying them, you say it as early as possible. So it's a tradition to do it after midnight, sort of depending on how Rosh Hashanah falls out. But in this case, so after Shabbos, after midnight, we did it last night. It was just, it was epic. It was beautiful. It was very moving. And I'll try to, it's not the best recordings, but hopefully you get a bit of a taste of it. And I'll try to play little pieces of it during the opening countdown of our class. How's everybody doing? Good to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Stephen in New Hampshire, Bella in Florida, Shendor in the Bronx, David in Indiana, Paul in the Great Northwest, Frank in LA, Sam in Virginia, Yehudit in South Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon in New Jersey, Tom in PA, Yehudit in South Carolina, a little bit of football talk. Go at it, my friends, go at it. I hope the Giants win tomorrow or tonight. I'm not even sure when they're playing. Ella is saying shalom. Marjorie in Georgia. Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Our daf is page 28 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. We've been working our way through chapter 1. Today, completing our discussion of Mishnah number 5. We'll open and complete, God willing, Mishnah number 6 and start Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 1 as well. The ongoing discussion, modes of acquisition. You can, when you acquire a wife, when you acquire a Hebrew slave, a Canaanite slave, when you acquire land, when you acquire livestock, when you acquire movable property. And as we've seen, there's a sharp distinction between modes of acquisition for real property, for land, versus movable property, right? Like kind of like everything else, right? Goods of various kinds. And today we'll actually talk about why this kinyan, this act of acquisition, is so important. I've mentioned it in passing a few times, but it'll actually be brought out here in today's discussion that, it's not just that, okay, I paid you, but you haven't handed me my goods yet. So until you hand me the goods, right, or in other words, until I take formal acquisition of the goods that I paid for, it's in your possession, under your authority, meaning you are liable for it in case something happens to it before I take formal possession, before I formally acquire what is the subject of our, deal to make a purchase and sale. Okay, we pick this up at the bottom of page 27b. The Gemara comments. Now, yesterday we were talking about this idea that normally if there's a dispute that ends up in front of a rabbinic court with regard to a purchase and sale of real property, of land, because purchase and sale of real property is so carefully documented in general, we don't have this idea that if there's a dispute, right? There's going to be a plaintiff and a defendant, and if the defendant makes a partial admission, well, yes, I received money from you, but I only received half the money that you're saying you gave me, and so I'm only going to give you half the goods, right? That would be a kind of partial admission. So when that kind of a partial admission is made with respect to movable property, the defendant in the rabbinic court, as a result of that partial admission, would be forced to take an oath that he did not receive the full amount, right? Or that whatever he's partially admitting to, that the rest is not true, and therefore he takes an oath to that effect. This does not apply in the case of real property. It does apply in the case of movable property, right? Goods, other kinds of things than land. But since we've been talking about that it is possible to use the mode of acquisition for acquiring land for the purpose of acquiring goods, when you can say that, okay, I'm gonna give you or rent to you or sell to you a tiny piece of land, really for the purpose of you taking possession, you formally acquiring this large quantity of movable goods. Right, yesterday we saw this idea where Rabban Gamliel says, I'm going to rent you this little piece of land on which, and I'm going to attach to this deal a whole bunch of produce, right? A whole bunch of produce he had extensive fields where the tithe of all his produce was a large amount of goods. And he says to, who was it? Yehoshua ben Hananiah, who was a Levite, you can receive your tithe from me by, taking possession of all these goods, which is going to be tied to this tiny little piece of land that I'm going to rent to you for that purpose. Right, so once you're bundling movable goods with land, then, if the deal somehow goes south, and the purchaser and seller or the giver and recipient are arguing about what happened, and the defendant in the case is going to make a partial admission, and then he's told to make an oath. Now that the movable goods and the land have been bundled together, he can be asked to make an oath with respect to the land that was part of this deal, whereas normally in a land deal, he would not be asked to make an oath, right? And so yesterday, at the end of the day, we were talking about what is the source for this idea that you can extend an oath. Now that I'm making you swear an oath that's permitted, right? It's permitted for me as a plaintiff to make you, the defendant, swear to an oath when you're admitting that part of it is you're liable for, but not all of it. And I'm saying, well, then swear an oath that that's the truth, that you didn't do anything wrong. And so normally I can't make you swear an oath with respect to land, but now I can because it's all part of the same deal. What's the source for that? And we saw that in the case of the sota, the suspected adulteress, where the husband, suspected her of having a dalliance with some man, and he warned her not to seclude herself with that man, and she did seclude herself with that man after the warning, and witnesses saw that. Okay, so then the husband and wife become prohibited to each other until they walk up to Jerusalem. This only applies when the temple is standing, which it hasn't in 2,000 years. But when the temple was standing, they would go to Jerusalem, they would appear at the temple, and she would have to swear an oath that she did not commit adultery when she was secluded with that man. And if indeed she's innocent, she'll be fine. If she's guilty and she's lying, then drinking the waters of bitterness will kill her. Right? Now, once she's swearing this oath that she didn't commit adultery with this man whom she secluded herself with behind closed doors, at that time, they can also make her take an oath that she never committed adultery against this husband. Right? So that's extending the oath. And so the fact that we can extend the oath, normally you can't make a wife swear an oath, you can't obligate her to swear an oath that she never cheated on her husband. But now that she's already in that position of being a sota and saying that she didn't commit adultery with that particular guy, then they can extend the oath and make her swear she never committed adultery. So that's the source for once you find yourself in the position of having to swear an oath, you might be forced to swear a bigger oath with regard to other matters that normally you would not be obligated to swear an oath for. So the Gemara comments, we found a source for the extension of an oath in the case of a sota, the suspected adulteress, which is a halakha, a law, involving a prohibition, right? It's prohibited to commit adultery. From where do we derive that an oath can be extended with regard to monetary matters as well, which is why we're talking about this in the first place. We're talking about monetary matters, right? There was a business deal involving movable goods and land, and we extended the oath to the land from the issue of the movable goods. So how do we know, just because in the case of the sota they can extend an oath there, Okay, but that's dealing with, matters of prohibited sexual unions, which is very serious, very big negative prohibitions in the Torah. How do we know that we can learn out from that we can also extend oaths in monetary matters? The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught that this can be derived through a kal v'chomer inference, like this. And just as in the case of a sota, where an oath cannot be imposed by one witness, as two witnesses must testify that the wife secluded herself with the man concerning whom she was warned in order for her to be obligated to take an oath of a sota, and yet one can extend her oath, is it not logical that with regard to a claim involving money, where an oath can be imposed by the testimony of one witness, that one can also extend the oath, right? In other words, if you can make people extend an oath in, very difficult matters, very, high stakes matters where two witnesses are required, then all the more so we should be able to extend an oath in lower stakes matters, right? It's only money, right? It's not talking about that, if somebody's guilty of adultery, they're liable to the death penalty. We're talking about much lower stakes kind of things, a typical financial dispute between parties, and where you can make somebody swear an oath by the testimony of one witness, right? In other words, the plaintiff and the defendant, the plaintiff is the witness who says, you owe me money. And the defendant says, I don't owe you money. I owe you half the money because I already paid you half the money. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. Swear an oath that you already paid me the money because it's just his word, his word versus his word, right? It's one versus the other. So there's only a single witness, and yet we're going to create the swearing of an oath. So why not extend the oath? If we can extend the oath in the high stakes, two witnesses required arena of the sota, why wouldn't we extend the oath here in the lower stakes, one witness required arena of monetary matters? And the Gemara answers, it is taught, and the Gemara further asks, okay, so that's the kal v'chomer inference, so why wouldn't it work? It should work. And the Gemara, instead of saying, okay, you're right, it asks another question. Well, we found a source for the extension of an oath in the case of a definite claim, meaning when the plaintiff is certain of his claim. So there we can extend the oath, using that kal v'chomer inference from the sota. But from where do we derive that this law of the extension of an oath applies also to uncertain claims when the plaintiff is not sure, right? The defendant says, okay, you lent me $100, I already paid you back $50. And the plaintiff, instead of saying, no, you didn't pay me back anything, and I'm sure, and that's where we got into that argument, rather the plaintiff says, you're saying you pay me back $50, but I don't remember that, right? So it's different than saying you didn't pay me back. It's saying, I don't remember, I'm not sure. Swear an oath that you did. Are we going to allow an extending an oath in that situation? So the Gemara answers, it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says the Torah states an external oath, i.e., an oath administered outside of the holy temple, and it states an internal oath, i.e., an oath that is administered inside the holy temple. And what is the oath that is administered inside the temple? This is the oath of the sota, the suspected adulteress. And what is the oath that is administered outside the temple? This is the oath that is taken in financial, monetary matters when somebody makes a partial admission of a claim. So just as with regard to an oath stated in the Torah that is taken inside the temple, the Torah rendered uncertainty like certainty. As in the case of a sota, the husband's claim is based on suspicion. He's not sure that she committed adultery. He just knows that he warned her not to seclude herself with that man, and she secluded herself with that man. He doesn't know what happened behind those closed doors, and because of that, he's making her take that oath in the temple. So too, with regard to an oath that is stated in the Torah that is taken outside of the temple, the Torah rendered uncertainty to be like certainty, i.e., all oaths can be extended to include even uncertain items. So maybe what we're saying is we got to the place where the defendant is going to have to swear an oath because the plaintiff is saying, you didn't pay me back anything. And the defendant says, I borrowed $100 from you and I paid back $50. I admit that I owe you $50, but I don't admit that I owe you the other $50. The plaintiff says, no, you didn't. Okay, so they're going to make him swear an oath. Now that he's swearing an oath, the plaintiff says, listen, didn't I also lend you money last year? Did you pay me that back? I'm not sure. So now that you're taking an oath about what you owe me, swear that you don't owe me anything else from last year, as well as this 50 that you claim that you don't owe me this year. And that would be uncertainty and uncertainty. The Gemara asks, extending the oath in a case of uncertainty. Now, the Gemara asks, until where does the extension of an oath reach? How far can you extend this oath and make the defendant swear about other matters other than the case at hand? Now that he's swearing an oath and you're saying, well, he might have owed you money last year and you're going to make him swear an oath about that? Well, how far does this extend? It has been established that a plaintiff can attach other claims to the oath that the defendant is required to take, even if they do not relate to the current claim submitted in court. To what extent can the plaintiff impose additional oaths? Rav Yehuda said, the law is that a plaintiff can even say to a defendant, take an oath to me that you are not my Canaanite slave. If the defendant is required to take an oath, for example, concerning denial of a debt, he can be forced to take an oath about this matter as well. It seems like now that the defendant is swearing an oath, the plaintiff can get him to swear an oath about anything that is part of their relationship. Now, think about what's going on here, right? It's like we've come to the rabbinic court because we're having a conflict. You admit that you owe me some money, but not all of it, so you're going to swear an oath. Now, there's not going to be any other evidence than this oath, right? If we have a different claim, we have a different argument, a different litigation about some debt that was from last year, and I have evidence to present about that, okay, that's a different case. But if there's other claims and there's no evidence supporting those claims other than that now the defendant is in court and he has to swear an oath about one thing, so make him swear an oath about other things, it's like, okay, well, if the guy doesn't owe me anything and he's a truth teller, he has no problem. He could just tell the truth about anything I make him to swear an oath about. But it's tricky because maybe he makes a mistake and then he swears a false oath, not because he's trying to lie, but just because he makes a mistake. We want to limit how many oaths we're going to be able to make him swear. Now, the Gemara asks, wait a minute, regarding this idea that you can even make him swear that he is not your Canaanite slave. Now, obviously, this is a case between two Jews. So they're using a little bit of hyperbole here. You're saying that in a case between two Jews, one Jew the plaintiff is suing the defendant, and now the defendant Jew who's swearing, I only owe you 50, not 100, and I can bring other matters to bear, and I can make him swear that he's not my Canaanite slave? My Canaanite slave? In other words, I'm saying, swear to me that you are a Jew, and that as a Jew, you aren't my Canaanite slave, and that's why you owe me money. This is very extreme. And the Gemara says, no. The court, and at least in terms of this idea, make him swear that he's not your Canaanite slave, the court ostracizes one who says this to another. That is, it's taught in a Baraisa. One who calls another a slave shall be ostracized. One who calls another a Mamzer incurs the punishment of 40 lashes. And if one calls another person a wicked person, then the insulted person may harass him in all aspects of his life. In light of this law, it is clear that the court will not force the accused to respond to this insult by taking an oath. So clearly there are limits to what you can get him to swear or not swear once he's taking an oath. All they've established so far is, we're not sure what the limit is, but there are limits. Now, in passing, we should note this idea that the sages were very forceful, in general about Lashon Hara, right? About wicked speech, about using the tongue in a malicious way. And here, this is another area of the law, but let's just pause for a second. If you accuse another person of being a slave, right, that they're actually a slave, right? In other words, that they're a lower strata person in society. If they really were a slave, then they, in other words, you're saying that you were a slave somewhere else and you escaped. And now, if you were a Canaanite slave, you escaped to our town and you're pretending to be a Jew. I mean, this is a huge insult, a huge accusation to level at a person, because if they've been living as a Jew in this town and it turns out that this is true, well, I mean, their children can't marry other children. People aren't going to do business with him. He's a huge fraud and a liar. I mean, this is a massive accusation. So you wouldn't say such a thing unless you have very compelling evidence that this was the case. So if you're just hurling this kind of talk as an insult, and think about what people say when they're really angry. They say terrible things to each other and about each other, right? And then calling someone a Mamzer. I mean, even surviving into modern times, the word Mamzer, right, which means a Jewish child born from an adulterous union, right? It means that his mother committed adultery by cheating on by cheating on her husband with this other man, and she got pregnant from this other man, and this is the child of that union. The Mamzer is a Jew, but he's not allowed to marry other Jews, only other Mamzers. So, it's a very, very severe insult, and if it's true, it's a very difficult status for a person to have. But even in modern times, the word Mamzer, that's what it means, but people use it kind of offhandedly as an insult, right? And the sages are telling you, don't ever do that. Don't ever use this kind of language just because you're angry and you want to call somebody the harshest thing that comes to your mind. You don't do that, right? The punishment for calling someone a Mamzer who's not a Mamzer is 40 lashes. I mean, that's a very serious punishment, right? Just to remind us that when we're angry, we don't lash out by just saying the first thing that comes to mind because we want to insult and belittle people. Rather, Rava said, now in terms of what is the limit of how much you can extend the oath, Rava said the plaintiff can extend an oath by stating, take an oath to me that you were not sold to me as a Hebrew slave. Well, in this case, the plaintiff is not questioning the man's lineage, as he is simply claiming that this person might be a Jew, who fell on hard times and sold himself into slavery to pay off his debt. And if there's some reason to believe this, like the guy said, swear to me that didn't happen. Okay, well, that didn't happen. Okay, well, the issue went away. But he didn't question his lineage. Now, the Gemara asks, but there is nothing novel about this law, as this is a proper claim, that there is money owed to him by the accused. And the sale and service of a Hebrew slave can be assessed in monetary terms and is analogous to all claims of debt, which can be imposed by extension of an oath. This is sort of like the most extreme version of what you can make him swear. But what we're saying is the only things you can make him swear about are money, right? He's already making a partial admission that he owes you money, and you're going to make him swear that he doesn't owe you any other kind of debt of money, right? That you can make him swear. So the Gemara answers, Rava conforms to his line of reasoning. As Rava says, the Hebrew slave himself is acquired by his master. Consequently, this claim involves not just money, but ownership over his person as well. So that would seem to indicate, no, you can't make him swear that because that's a different kind of case. And the Gemara says, if so, this is similar to a claim concerning ownership of land. And the Mishna already taught that an oath can be extended to include a claim concerning land. The Gemara answers, this ruling is necessary lest you say it is land that people are likely to sell privately, and if it is so that the plaintiff had sold it to him, the sale would not have generated publicity, and the public would not know about it. Therefore, the plaintiff's claim that the defendant sold land to him is reasonable. By contrast, in this case where the plaintiff claims that he purchased the defendant as a Hebrew slave, if it is so that he purchased him as a slave, the sale would have generated publicity. Since this supposed sale is not common knowledge, one might have thought that the defendant cannot be forced to take an oath to deny this claim. Therefore, Rava teaches us that despite the absence of public knowledge, one can extend an oath to this claim as well. So interesting, because it's a monetary matter, even saying, yeah, swear that you were not sold to me, take an oath that you were not sold to me as a Hebrew slave, please God, a case shouldn't get to be that contentious where they're swearing to that kind of a thing. Okay, And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Here's Mishnah number 6. The Mishnah discusses a transaction involving the barter of two items. Right? We've been talking about how do you acquire land? How do you acquire movable property? How are they being acquired? In exchange for money. Now we're going to talk about, well, what happens if people barter? Right? I will trade you a donkey for an ox. Okay. So if I'm paying for your ox with my donkey, so if I hand over the donkey before I have a chance to pull the ox, have I acquired the ox? Or, right, I gave you the donkey. In other words, you pulled the donkey into your domain. So now you've acquired the donkey. And I'm paying for the ox with my donkey. So when you acquire the donkey, have I acquired the ox or not yet? The Mishnah discusses a transaction involving the barter of two items with regard to all items used as monetary value for another item, i.e., instead of a buyer paying money to the seller, they exchange items of value with each other. Once one party in the transaction acquires the item he is receiving, this party is obligated with regard to the item being exchanged for it. So if you and I make a deal, I'm going to trade you my donkey for your ox. So when you pull the donkey, right, I present the donkey and you take his reins or his bridle and you pull him, now you've acquired the donkey. At that moment, you become obligated to give me the ox. The deal is done, right? The ox is mine. You can't renege on this deal. Even though I haven't pulled the ox, once you pulled the donkey, the ox becomes mine. Therefore, if in this situation that we're talking about, I'm trading you the donkey for my donkey for your ox, and you take the donkey and pull him, right? So you've acquired the donkey. Now I own the ox, right? The ox is mine. I have the right to the ox. So before I get it, if it is destroyed or lost, he incurs the loss. What does that mean? How so? If one exchanges an ox for a cow or a donkey for an ox, once this party acquires the animal that he is receiving, this party is obligated with regard to the item being exchanged for it. Right, but who bears the loss before it's handed over? Let's just read how the halakha came out here. Any movable property can be acquired by means of exchange. If one exchanges a cow for a donkey or wine for oil, when one party pulls or lifts what he is acquiring, the second item is acquired by the other party, no matter where it is at the same time. This mode is valid whether the items are exchanged without concern for their precise value or whether the items were appraised before being exchanged. So it would seem that if I let you pull the donkey, right, now as soon as you pull the donkey, I own the ox. So even though the ox might still be on your property, it's my ox. And that would seem to say that, well, if something happens to the ox before I can, get it home, it's my loss. Right? It's now, maybe we made a deal that you're going to hang on to my ox for me for a few days until I can get over to your property with, my ox cart or my ox trailer so that I can bring it home. And then we might have a different dispute if something happens to the ox. But the bottom line is, as soon as you pull the donkey, the ox becomes mine. Okay, that's Mishnah number 6. Here's the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what is the item given in exchange mentioned in the Mishnah? If it is referring to a coin, now we're saying we're bartering one item for another. Well, what if one of the items is a coin? Well, that sounds like I'm buying it for money. But you're saying barter is not money. What are we saying? Right? What is the item given in exchange mentioned in the Mishnah? If it is referring to a coin for which property is usually exchanged, can one learn from the Mishnah that a coin can effect exchange? I.e., it is possible to perform an active acquisition of exchange, either a standard exchange or a symbolic exchange using coins. Well, this is problematic, as the law is that coins cannot be used for this active acquisition. Rav Yehuda said the phrase, all items used as monetary value for another item, is not referring to a coin. Rather, this is what the Mishnah is saying with regard to all items that can be appraised when used as monetary value for another item, i.e. that their value can be appraised relative to the value of the other item, excluding a coin whose value is apparent, it doesn't need to be appraised. Once one party in the transaction acquires the item he is receiving, this party is obligated with regard to the item being exchanged for it, right? So in other words, the point of this Mishnah is that we're bartering one thing for another without the use of money. So don't introduce money as one of the items. The novelty of the Mishnah is that all items, not only vessels, can be used to perform an active acquisition of exchange. Therefore, one should not infer that the same is the law with regard to coins, right? It says all items, but those items to the exclusion of coins. So the Gemara comments, the language of the Mishnah is also precise, as it teaches afterward, how so? If one exchanges an ox for a cow or a donkey for an ox. Once this party acquires the animal that he is receiving, this party is obligated with regard to the item being exchanged for it. This clause apparently explains the previous clause and employs the example of animals, not coins. And the Gemara summarizes, learn from this clause that the Mishnah is referring to acquisition through exchange of items, not money. We're on 28b. The Gemara asks, and with regard to what entered our minds initially, that a coin affects symbolic exchange. Okay, now symbolic exchange is where, I'm going to sell you a piece of land. I believe symbolic exchange works for land. And the mode of acquisition, right? You're going to pay me the money. How are you going to take possession of the land? I'm going to hand you a handkerchief in the presence of witnesses, and that handkerchief is symbolic exchange. Know ye witnesses by these here parts, whatever the kind of language you normally hear in contracts, that I am now transferring my land that Joe paid me for to Joe. And this handkerchief symbolizes that exchange. That's symbolic exchange. Okay, so we could do that with a handkerchief. Can we do it with coins? Right? Why not use coins for symbolic exchange? It's symbolic. It's not obviously the worth of the land. He just, he probably sent me a check for $1 million, deposited in my bank. Can I use a silver dollar to represent the land that I'm handing to him as a symbolic exchange? Where am I? Where am I? Okay. And the Gemara asks, and with regard to what entered our minds initially, that a coin effects symbolic exchange. So what is the meaning of the clause, how so? If one exchanged an ox for a cow, once this party acquires the animal that he's receiving, this party is obligated with regard to the item being exchanged for it. This example does not involve a coin. So the Gemara explains that it was assumed that this is what the Mishnah is saying. Not only can a coin be used for the active acquisition of exchange, but produce can also affect exchange. How so? If one exchanged meat of an ox for a cow, or the meat of a donkey for an ox, once this party acquires the item that he is receiving, the party is obligated with regard to the item that he exchanged for it. So the Gemara asks, this works out well, and we haven't proven that we could use coins for symbolic exchange or not. The Gemara says, this works out well according to the opinion of Rav Sheshas, who says produce affects exchange, i.e., the mode of acquisition of exchange, barter, applies not only to vessels, but also to produce and animals. Interesting, produce, we normally think of, like bushels of wheat, but you could also think of it as meat, as opposed to a living cow, right? When a living cow gets butchered and becomes meat, they're calling that produce. But according to the opinion of Rav Nachman, who says produce does not affect exchange, what can be said? The Gemara answers, according to this opinion, the Mishnah is dealing with money alone. And this is what the Mishnah is saying. There is a transaction involving money that is like an exchange. How so? If one exchanged the monetary value of an ox for a cow, or the monetary value of a donkey for an ox, the transaction is effective. In this case, one sold his ox to another for an agreed sum of money. And after the buyer acquired the ox by pulling it, he then offered to give the seller his cow in exchange for the money that he owes him. In this case, the cow is acquired without the seller having to pull it. Although this acquisition initially was to be an exchange, it is ultimately a purchase for money, as the second animal is acquired as a result of the forgiving of the monetary debt. Right? We haven't solved the question. The Mishna is talking about exchanging items for items. Okay? And so far we've learned this is to the exclusion of one of the items being money. So then it was asked, well, maybe one of the items it's not money, but we're going to use money just for the symbolic exchange for the purpose of acquiring that item, as opposed to, when one of them takes, like when you take the donkey, I immediately acquire the cow, even though I haven't pulled the cow. But maybe what we're saying is, okay, you take the donkey and then give me a coin to symbolize that I now took charge of the cat, that I acquired the cat, right? Maybe we need that. It's not going to end up that way, but we're still considering all the possibilities here. Now, what is the reason for this ruling in light of the law that one cannot acquire movable property by means of money alone? We've already said that if you want to acquire movable property, you're going to sell me movable property. Let's say you're going to sell me a table and chairs. Okay, I'm going to give you $100. You took the $100. Have I acquired the table and chairs? No. I have to lift the table or pull the table. Or you give me symbolic exchange. You give me the handkerchief, so it represents I've now acquired the table. But just the fact that I gave you money didn't do it, right? Now, what is the reason for this ruling in light of the law that one cannot acquire movable property by means of money alone? And the Gemara explains that Rav Nachman holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said, by Torah law, money affects acquisition. By Torah law, if you're selling me a table and chairs and I give you $100 and you take the $100, we agree, I'm going to give you $100 for the table and chairs, and you take the $100, by Torah law, I've acquired the table and chairs. We're done. So why is that not the law? By Torah law, it's done. Money affects acquisition. Why did the rabbis change the law? Rabbi Yochanan said, by Torah law, money affects acquisition. I.e., when one pays money, he acquires the item, even if he has not yet performed another act of acquisition. And what is the reason that the sages said that pulling acquires an item and money does not? This is a rabbinic decree, lest the seller say to the buyer, after receiving the money, well, your wheat was burned in the loft, right? After receiving the money, before delivering the table and chairs, he could say, oh, you know what? Your table that I sold to you and you hadn't picked it up yet, yeah, it burned up. Sorry. And the sages were protecting buyers. It's like this is one of the earliest consumer protection laws, right? The sages said, lest the seller try to get away with something like that, we say that the buyer has not taken control, has not formally acquired what he's purchasing until he physically does something like lifting or pulling or the symbolic exchange or something like that, where everyone knows that it's his, right? Until then, the seller is liable if something happens to the goods before the buyer formally acquires. Right? This is a rabbinic decree, lest the seller say to the buyer after receiving the money, your wheat was burned in the loft. If a fire breaks out or some other mishap occurs after a seller receives the money, he will not bother to save the goods in his house because they no longer belong to him and the buyer may incur a loss. To prevent this, the sages instituted this formal act of acquisition, the kinyan. So the sages therefore decreed that acquisition takes effect only when a buyer pulls the item. The reason that the Mishna allows a transaction that indicates that one can effect acquisition using only money is because that case of the Mishna was explained by Rav Nachman is an uncommon occurrence. It is rare for one who has sold his animal in exchange for money to change his mind and request an animal from the purchaser instead. With regard to a common occurrence, the sages issued a decree. whereas in the case of an uncommon occurrence, the sages did not issue a decree. That is a general principle. When the sages issue decrees, it's not for like once in a blue moon type of things. It's to prevent, the types of cases coming up that cause trouble commonly. Consequently, the sages did not apply their decree to this situation. So the Gemara asks, and how is the Mishna explained according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, who disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan, and says that pulling is explicitly stated in the Torah, because it said that when you make a deal with your neighbor, put something in his hand, that's pulling, right? It's a deal when the goods transferred from one hand to another. So according to Reish Lakish, the fact it's not just by Torah law, it's not just by rabbinic decree that we require pulling when the buyer formally acquires. It's even by Torah law, according to Reish Lakish. This works, right? So Reish Lakish maintains that the acquisition of movable property cannot be performed with money by Torah law, and therefore there can be no distinction between common and uncommon cases. And this works out well if Reish Lakish holds in accordance with the opinion of Rav Sheshas, who says that produce affects exchange. If so, he can explain the Mishna in accordance with the opinion of Rav Sheshas. But if he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman, who says that produce does not affect exchange and a coin does not affect acquisition by Torah law or by rabbinic law, in what manner does he establish the Mishnah? And the Gemara answers, per force. Reish Lakish holds in accordance with the opinion of Rav Sheshas. That was difficult. If we wanted to make sure we understood it, we'd probably want to reread that whole Gemara a few times, but we need to move forward. We are now on Mishnah number 7, and I am very close to done teaching today. So, if you got questions or comments, get them in. Mishnah number 7, near the bottom of page 28b. Mishnah number 7 of chapter 1. The authority of the temple treasury effects acquisition by means of money to the seller. Okay. We're going to encounter, as we've encountered before, special rules for the temple treasury. Temple treasury always wins. Why? Is this some kind of a money grab, power play by the sages who are in cahoots, God forbid, with the priests in the temple? No, Has v'Shalom, you should never think such a thing. The reason that the temple treasury always wins is to protect the average Jew. Right? So the average Jew, if he's going to make a sale to the temple treasury, or he's going to make a vow that he's going to donate something to the temple treasury, right? And if he vows to give on Tuesday, and the value of the he says, I'm going to give a bushel of corn. All right, I'm feeling generous. I grow corn and I consecrate a bushel of corn. I'm going to give it to the temple treasury. Okay? And then the next day, the value of corn, goes down, right? So what was a bushel was worth $100 today, it's worth $50 tomorrow. So tomorrow, since I vowed to give a bushel of corn, but now corn is worth half as much, I'm basically going to have to give 2 bushels, right? Because the temple always wins. And the reason why this protects Jews is because, God forbid, you should rip off God, right? You have to be very meticulous. Like any kind of dealings you have with the holy, we're gonna round up if rounding up is in favor of the holy, and we're gonna round down if rounding down is in the favor of the holy, right? And so the temple treasury is going to be able to acquire goods with a much easier, more streamlined mode of acquisition than people can acquire goods from each other. That's the general principle. The authority of the temple treasury affects acquisition by means of money to the seller, right? We just said that if I'm buying a donkey from you and I give you the money, right? Until I pull the donkey, I haven't acquired the donkey. But if you're selling your donkey to the temple treasury and the temple treasury gives you $100, the temple treasury has already acquired the donkey, right? The temple always stands in a more powerful place. The authority of the temple treasury is greater than of a common person, and therefore it affects acquisition by means of money to the seller. And the authority, i.e. the mode of acquisition of a commoner, is by possession. Furthermore, one's declaration to the Most High i.e. when one consecrates an item through speech, is equivalent to transferring an item to a common person. And the item is acquired by the temple treasury through his mere speech. So if I say, I consecrate my horse, bli neder, I don't have a horse and there is no temple, but, just for a teaching example, if I say I consecrate my horse, I'm giving my horse to the temple treasury, boom, the temple treasury acquired my horse. That's not my horse anymore. That is not my horse anymore. As soon as I say that, the temple owns the horse. That's why people are always very careful. Even today when the temple is not standing. If they say, I'm gonna give money to charity, I'm gonna give so much money to charity. Now, if they're just kind of thinking about how much they're gonna give, or they're kind of like, moved kind of emotionally, and they're like, just in case I might change my mind later, that's why they always say bli neder, right? Bli neder, without an oath. I'm not saying this with an oath. I'm just thinking out loud. I am not making performative, declarative speech. That's why people are very careful in making vows to charity, to educational, etc. It's from this Mishna right here. So the sages taught in a baraisa, so that was the Mishnah. It's a very short Mishnah, but it has a big whopping principle. So the sages taught in a baraisa, how does the authority of the temple treasury affect acquisition by means of money? With regard to the temple treasurer who gives coins for an animal, even if the animal is at the other end of the world, he, meaning the temple treasury, acquires it immediately. And with regard to a commoner, he does not acquire the animal until he pulls it, as I just explained. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Tomorrow, we'll continue at the regular Monday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Let's check comments or questions on Kiddushin 28. Joe, isn't the judgment against a Mamzer that their descendants for 7 generations cannot marry a Jew? I don't remember that. In terms of like generations, there's like the Egyptian and the Moabites. And there's a distinction between like a Moabite woman, can marry into the congregation. A Moabite man cannot. An Egyptian in the 3rd generation can marry. Regular Jew, like an Egyptian convert can only marry another convert, but the grandson can marry a regular Jew, something like that. That's it, distinguished from the law of all other converts. A Mamzer, for sure, cannot marry a regular Jew, can only marry another Mamzer. There's a few other categories that he can marry. But is there a limit on that for how many generations? I don't know. I don't remember that law. If you've got the source for that, please share. Sam, is Wimpy's statement, right, from Popeye, I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today, halakhically acceptable? Yes, but not because we've now made an exchange. Right? I think what Wimpy would be saying is, may I borrow the cost of this hamburger so I can eat it today, and I will owe you that money, and the time limit of our contract is Tuesday, right? So if I don't pay it by Tuesday, I become delinquent in my debt. That would be my impression of what is going on there. I could be wrong, but that's my impression. Shandora, would a collectible coin, very good, very good. I was thinking this as we were reading. Would a collectible coin count as a coin that counts for exchange, as it would be appraised as different from other coins, as either it's a coin from a country that doesn't exist or such, or just a misprint? Right, the bottom line there is, they said because a coin has an apparent value, right? Meaning a penny's worth a penny, a dollar's worth a dollar. But if I have a special 1909 Series D penny or 1809 penny, that might be worth $1 million. That is not a regular coin. And I'm sure you're right, Shandora. That now is an item right, that's up for barter, that needs to be appraised, and maybe we want to make a deal where I'm going to trade you, my $1 million penny, very rare, for your $1 million stamp, or I'm going to trade you my $1 million penny for your, painting by Jackson Pollock or something like that. Of course we can barter those things, and now the coin essentially is not a coin, right? Technically it's a coin, but it's worth far more, and they haven't talked about collectibles in that way, but I'd be shocked if that's not considered a different class of item. So I think that's a great question. Sharon, if the lack of pulling affects acquisition, then why, or does not affect acquisition, then why does that not appear to be the law of exchange in the donkey for the ox? Couldn't we consider the donkey to be comparable to money? Well, that's exactly what the sages are asking, right? Why is it that if we're saying, the way the Mishna is worded, is that we're exchanging things that have monetary value, right? In other words, we're not exchanging a donkey for a handkerchief. That's really a gift, where we're using the handkerchief as the mode of symbolic exchange, so that you can say you've acquired the gift. I've now given you the donkey, you've taken the donkey. The donkey is yours. And maybe you gave me a handkerchief for it. Not because the donkey and the handkerchief are somehow equivalent. But when we're exchanging, a cow for a donkey, why is it that when you take the donkey, the cow immediately becomes mine? Shouldn't it be that, okay, you took the donkey, it's like you received the $100 that I would pay for the cow, and I don't acquire the cow until I pull the cow? That's exactly what they're asking. But they're saying, no, it doesn't work that way. Because it's barter, because there's this exchange, once you take the donkey, the deal is done, and you're obligated to give me the cow is my cow. In terms of the liability, of what happens, until I receive the cow, do I bear the loss if you have a fire and the cow is on your property? It seems like, yeah, that's what's going on. But maybe that's not so clear, because what it said was, once you take the donkey, you become obligated in the cow. So maybe you're still going to be, recognized as a shomer, right? Like it's still in your custody. So you might be responsible or liable for it at some level. But I think the key is the deal is done. Once you take the donkey, the deal is done. You have to give me the cow. You can't get out of it. And you can't substitute some other cow or some other money for that cow. You have to give me that cow, right? You might offer to me, hey, you know what? Would you? My wife doesn't really want to, let go of this cow, or my kid is in love with this cow. Would you take this other cow, or would you take the car instead of the cow, or something like that? But you'd have to get my permission. That's my impression of what's going on here. It's a little bit difficult, but you can see also where we headed. This is the last. There are 6 seders, 6 sedarim, right? So there are 6 groups of tractates in the Talmud, and this tractate Kiddushin is the last tractate of Seder Nashim, right? So we've been studying, and that Nashim means women. And so we've been studying kind of the laws of family relationships, right? And that's why we're doing Sota and Kiddushin and Gittin, right? All these family relationship tractates. And where we're going is Nezikin, damages, which is all about the law of financial relationships, right? And we're going to start with Bava Kama and Bava Metzia and then Bava Basra. And this is a nice kind of transition. We're already talking about acquisition and purchase and sale, etc. And so I suspect that some of these questions that we have, they're not being fully resolved here, because here we're really only talking about the mode of acquisition, the moment of acquisition. In terms of when somebody becomes liable and what damages are going to be paid and who's responsible for how much and what's fair and what's not. So we're going to be starting that next month, right? Next month. And by the way, right, today was what number? 1344, right? This was page 1344 out of 2711. So we're like 12 days away from the halfway point of our 7.5-year journey through the Talmud. Wow. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for today. See you tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific.